This is Activity 3, Keeping Equality, from Lesson 3, Balanced Moves, and from Unit 4, Linear Equations and Linear Systems. And this is a revised version of Activity 3. In Activity 3, you're given 3 problems to examine. In this first problem, you have Noah's solution and you have Lynn's solution to this equation up here where they solve for A. And you are asked, do you agree with either of them? I am in the habit of always changing subtraction to addition. Wherever I see subtraction, I change it to addition. And you can do that. You can use the inverse operation and you can use the additive inverse. And that removes any confusion of how this becomes a -6 or how this becomes a -3. Because you get rid of this term, you're left with -6, and you get rid of this term, this A here, you're left with -3. It just makes, for me, life easier. So once again, I'm using the inverse operation and I'm using the additive inverse. The inverse operation and the additive inverse. Noah chooses to use the distributive property in his solution. So he takes this 2 and he says if there are 2 groups of A plus -3, that means if you take everything out of those groups, you have 2 A's and you have 2 -3's, which is equal to -6. Lynn chooses to take 1/2 of each side. So if I have 2 of something on the right side, if I take 1/2 of that, then I have 1 of those things. So I have 1 of these groups of A plus -3, and so I must have half of 14A on the left side, which is 7A. Noah then chooses to add a -2A to both sides because he wants to get rid of this 2A right here. Add a -2A, and Lynn chooses to add a -A to both sides because she wants to get rid of this A right here. So add -A. So this is equal to 12A equals -6, and this is equal to 6A equals -3. Well, if you have 12 of something, to get to one of those, just take 1/12 of those 12 A's. That equals 1A. And that means on this side, you have to look at 1/12 of -6. Well, 1/12 of -6 is equal to -6/12 is equal to -1/2. So A equals -1/2. On this side, if you have 6 of something, then 1/6 of that is going to equal one of those things. So 1/6 of 6A is equal to 1A. On this side, you have to take 1/6 of -3. So 1/6 of -3 equals -3/6, and that also equals -1/2. So both Noah and Lynn get the same value for A. Now you can check each of them by taking that -1/2 and replacing A up here and replacing A up here. So you have 14 times the -1/2 equals 2 times -1/2 plus -6. And on this side, you have 7 times -1/2 right here equals a -1/2 plus -3. So this is -7, so -1/2 of 14 is -7. -1/2 of 2 is -1, plus a -6, and you end up with -7 equals -7. On this side, you have a -7/2. This is -7/2 equals a -1/2 plus a -3. -3 is a -6/2. Add these together. This is also equal to -7/2. So multiply both of these by a +2, and you end up with -7 equals -7. So you end up with the same equation on both sides when you check each equation by replacing A with -1/2. For problem number 2, Elena is asked to solve this equation for the value of x. And so what do you recommend that she does first? And notice that they're giving you the choice between using the distributive property right here or not using the distributive property. As I mentioned before, I always change subtraction to addition by using the inverse operation and adding the additive inverse. And again, it just makes it easier for me to work with addition rather than subtraction. And I rewrote this equation 3 times down here because I can see 3 different ways to start solving this equation. One way is to factor out the 5. So 15 has a factor of 5, -10 has a factor of 5, and there's the 5 here. So if I factor out a 5 here and here, I'm left with 5 times 3. So this is 1/5 of 15 is 3. and 1/5 of a negative 10x is a negative 2x. So now I have 5 groups of 3 plus a negative 2x and 5 groups of x plus 9. That means that 3 plus negative 2x has to equal x plus 9. In the middle, you can multiply each of these by 1/5. You have 1/5 of 15, 1/5 of a negative 10x, and 1/5 of 5. So 1/5 of these 5 groups. And over here, you can use the distributive property. So I have 15 plus a negative 10x, and on this side, I have 5 of these groups. That means I have 5 x's total, and I have 5 9's, which is equal to 45. Now, every one of these, I can now get to the same equation. So 1/5 of 5 of these groups is one of these groups, and 1/5 of 5 of these groups is one of those groups. So 1/5 of 5 groups equals 1/5 of 5 groups. In the middle, it's 1/5 of each of these terms. So 1/5 of 15, 1/5 of a negative 10x, and 1/5 of 5 groups, again, is one of those groups. And in the last example on the right, you can take 1/5 of each of these terms, because each term is a multiple of 5. So 1/5 of 15, 1/5 of a negative 10x, 1/5 of 5x, and 1/5 of 45. I would probably recommend to use the distributive property first. 5x plus 45, so this way of solving the equation over here. But the more I look at it, it might be easier to do the middle. 1/5 of 15, 1/5 of a negative 10x equals x plus 9. 1/5 of 15, 1/5 of a negative 10x equals x plus 9. 1/5 of 5 times x plus 9 is x plus 9. So either one of these. I probably would not factor out the 5. I probably would not use this approach. In this third problem, Diego is going to solve this equation for the value of x. The authors are pointing you towards making a choice between using the distributive property right here or not using the distributive property. And once again, I'm going to change the subtraction to addition, so the inverse operation, and I'm going to add the additive inverse, which is a negative 8. So here's the same equation written twice. And one choice is to use the distributive property. So if I have 4 of these groups, that means all together I have 4 x's and I have 4 5's, and 4 times 5 is 20. On the right side, if I look at 1/4 of these 4 groups, so x plus 5, that's going to have to equal 1/4 of this term plus 1/4 of this term. Now this is a bit more difficult because now we're introducing fourths. But if you just continue to work through it with those fourths, 1/4 of 3x is 3/4 of an x, plus 1/4 of negative 8 is negative 2, and 1/4 of 4 of these groups is just one of those groups. Now if we add a positive 2 to both sides, we're going to get rid of this negative 2, and 5 plus positive 2 is 7. So now we have 3/4 of x is equal to x plus 7. Well, 1x is the same as 4/4 x. And I'm going to add negative 7 to both sides to get rid of this 7 here. So the negative 7 shows up over here. And I'm going to add a negative 3/4 x to both sides to get rid of this positive 3/4 x. So 4/4 plus a negative 3/4 is equal to 1/4. A little bit more difficult. And multiply by 4, because if I have 1/4 of an x, a whole x is 4 times that 1/4. That means that x is equal to 4 times negative 7 equals negative 28. On the left side, it's a whole lot easier to use the distributive property, because now I'm going to add a negative 3x to both sides to get rid of this 3x and move the x's all over here. So 4x plus a negative 3x is just a single x. And I'm going to get rid of this 20 on the right side by adding a negative 20. Negative 20 plus negative 8 is negative 28. So in both cases, I get x equal to negative 28. And this left side is a whole lot easier, so I would recommend using the distributive property.